So like,
If you notice me do this, you'll say do this.
yeah. Okay,
Okay.
I'll just do this or something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So that way you know to like just bring it right back up. But I'll
Thank
keep
you.
you level and make sure everyone can hear you okay.
Thank you.
No problem. And I'll work on getting those pictures for you on
Okay.
the slide.
Oh, there's a agenda for you. This, but everything that I'm going to talk with you about is on paper. I brought paper for everything. And we may not be able to see the videos, but that's okay because the links are down below. Thank you. If you need an agenda, there are some on some of the chairs. If you want to take an extra, please do. And I also have a couple up here. There you go. All right, you're all going to help me keep this mic up to my mouth because this way the Zoom people are able to hear well, okay? So if I do this, you do this, okay? Thank you, I appreciate it, and so do the people on Zoom. So I'd like to warm you up a little bit and have you turn to the person next to you, so maybe just in twos or threes if that's easier. Introduce yourself and tell the person one thing you love about your work and one thing that's challenging about your work.
So for me, I think in the work I do, one of the things I love is the relationship building with a lot of my residents in the community. One of the challenging things that goes along with that is being divided between 3 different properties. So it can be challenging to serve all those
It's both the challenge and just trying to keep everybody happy. Ask questions. I really enjoy that, like,
I love supervising, but I think the hard thing for me is like that meeting was like that. I know.
That happens, like they'll call the county place and then the place and it is the day sometimes a lot more difficult. Okay.
I'm going to give you one more minute. Okay, why don't we come back as a group? Hello. Hello. Hi, guys. Thank you for coming. You introduced yourselves, and I'm sure you know a little bit about the person next to you, and I'm guessing some of you sat next to somebody you know quite well. So, my name is Roseanne Marmore. I was a resident services coordinator and resident services manager with Reach Community Development and with Home Forward. I have worked with many of the housing organizations I was going to say in Portland, but some in outside of Portland as well. I currently run the Resident Services Peer Leadership Group, which I'm so old, I still call it the Resident Services Working Group. But I came today because it sounded like some of you had wanted to talk about grief and managing grief inside the buildings. And I'm assuming also for yourselves. for how you manage grief inside the building when your person in the community passes away. So we're gonna, it's a big topic, and I do grief retreats for people 2 or 3 times a year who are grieving to kind of talk about this. So it is an expertise of mine, and it's something I care about a lot because we've all experienced grief and we don't know what to do with it when we're experiencing it. I'd like to start by just talking a little bit about the stages of grief. Woo. If I fall, that will not be good. Okay. Okay. If you could put this up a little bit. I'm sorry, I've forgotten your name. Alex, thank you. So I wanted to have everything on one piece of paper instead of a PowerPoint. This is in the Google Drive, so you have that. And there's information about me. I can certainly send this to you as a hard copy if you want. But what's important to understand about the stages of grief is that they are not stages. It isn't you do one thing and then you do another thing and then you do another thing. It's a pendulum. You go back and forth throughout your lifetime, actually. It doesn't change the way in which you understand the stages of grief don't change through time. They morph. It becomes a part of who you are. And so understanding that when there's grief inside a community, it becomes part of the community, who they are, what their history is. And understanding their history and connecting them to all the things that have happened can be a way to be very helpful in talking about grief in a community context. History can soothe, right? What did he bring? What did she do? Who was she? These stages, when I was working on them for this, it's interesting because they're really about individuals, but I thought, wow, they work in terms of community. When you have a death inside your community, the first thing is, no, that didn't happen. How could that have happened, right? And the next is being angry of the person who passed away, the thing they did that got them there, right? Blaming. Anger is a way of expelling that energy that is so sad and so hard. We bargain. Well, what if I did this? Maybe I should have done that, right? There's this regret inside what happened to the person and our part in that because we're hurting. And that is true as a community, and you've seen that, I'm sure, inside your buildings. Becoming depressed from the loss, and then moving towards acceptance, acknowledging and understanding that this happened. And those 5 are related to a woman named Kubler-Ross. That was her last name. She's, excuse me? Elizabeth, thank you. I'm actually very bad with names. It's terrible. As you witnessed when I couldn't remember his name. Anyway, so she had come up with these stages of grief, and they got messed up in terms of how people talked about them, and again, talked about them as stages when they are a pendulum. And when she was dying, she said to her colleague, David something or other, maybe you know him too. Anyway, she said, there's more work to do. We have got to figure out what else we're going to do. It's not just those stages, there's more to it. And he continued the research and realized that the biggest sort of end stage that he was able to find is making meaning. What does it mean to make meaning of a death or loss? So in community, that can mean, like when I was at Reach, it meant putting up a bike rack in honor of the person who had died because he biked everywhere. So having that be in the front of the building. Other times it's about plants or water. So there are ways of looking at your properties and asking the people in the building to make some meaning of this loss. Working with folks about depression, connecting them, being supportive and understanding when somebody is relapsed. and how you can be there for them rather than exile them, right? Which is what a lot of people feel they need to do. So as you're thinking about the stages of grief and what you've seen in your buildings, what I'd like you to do is get into small groups. I want you to be in something like 2, 3, 4 people, I think is probably good. And I'd like you to talk about what you've seen, how people have expressed grief and loss at the sites. And I want you to think about culture and how culture plays a role in how people grieve loss. Because if you're not connected to the culture of the property, you're not going to be able to attend to the needs of their grief in the way that's going to work for them. Okay? And every building has a culture. Some people forget that, but every building has a life of its own. It wakes up, it eats at a time, they all go to bed at a time, right? There's a way in which that building or property exists in the world. And so thinking about that as you look at grief will be helpful. I have also included, it's two-sided, but I'd like you to look at this together and think about how that impacts you as the resident services person in the property. So I'm going to give you 7 minutes to talk about that. If it feels like you need more time, please just let me know, okay? All right, have at it. I want to suggest that if questions are coming up in your groups, that you write them down so that we can address them when we get back together. Okay. Do you all want a couple more minutes? We're going to have the group come back together. So one more minute. All right, I want to learn from you, and I know you want to learn from one another. So let's bring the group back to the front. Awesome. Thank you. So I wanted to use this as the main part of what we're going to be talking about today. So what are you seeing? What have you done? And how does culture impact how you make decisions about grief at your properties? So, and then, of course, if you have any questions for the group as well. What came up in your group? Because I already know you have a question because you gave me the idea to write something down. So what came up?
Okay, so I work in 55 and older resident services, but I've only been doing it for about 6 months, and I have never done housing before. This is also for the Zoom people. Okay. And I've already had several people pass away at my different properties. And part of what comes up, especially coming out of COVID and especially at one particular property, is this feeling of like, why did this person have to die alone in their room? Like, and oh, wait, who was that guy? Was he the guy that was in the scooter or was he this other guy? Like, just this feeling of like, oh man, we didn't even really know who this person was. And then trying to manage that. That was really hard. And then one of the things that came up was, so, you know, it's like anything else. One person may be more popular than another person. So you might have a celebration of life and the whole building turns out, and then you do it again for someone else and no one else shows. And that's grief in itself too. That's painful. So just, those are some of the things that came up.
Can I ask what people have done about that when it's kind of, you know, more for one and less for another in terms of the feeling about the resident who passed? So you have a celebration of life and no one comes. What happened over there?
So, do you want to share or you want me to share?
No, go ahead.
Okay. So like Renee was saying, and I work with Renee. So like Renee was saying, we've had celebrations of life where we've had quite a few people come, and we've had celebrations of life where nobody comes. And so what we decided to do was, we recently had someone die who was very popular at the building. And what we decided before planning anything is that if we are approached from someone at the building wanting to do something, then we'll support them in doing it. And that happened. And so we let that person take it on, and we just supported them. So it wasn't actually we're with Community Partners for Affordable Housing. So it wasn't just SEPA doing it. And then during that celebration of life, you shouted out a couple of people that we had lost, right?
Yeah. Really, I but it almost happens spontaneously. It's like giving space for other people to be acknowledged, instead of kind of mandating it, kind of just opened it up
Mhm.
in an organic way that works.
And I think, the beauty of that idea is that the ritual comes from the community, and the person who needs that ritual gets to define what things look like when the community is grieving or when that person is grieving. I think another thing is offering up a space where people can go. So for me, I call it an altar. So November is typically November is grief month. A lot of people are grieving during that month. It's a very hard month, especially here in Oregon, I've noticed. And I set up an altar for myself in my home, and it's got different things in there that remind me of my grandparents and my parents and other things that connect me to my history and the losses that I've experienced, so that I have a place for that. So I think that's another way that instead of holding a ceremony or a gathering, you offer up silence for people, which is something almost none of us get anymore. Any other things that came up in your group, Rachel Hall?
Talk about on the spot. So, something that I feel like collectively came up in our group is that grief and loss is different, and it looks different, and it takes on different meanings and expressions. So there's like no right or wrong, but it's just, it is what it is, and it's different.
Yes, I'm so glad you said that. I think the stages of grief kind of speak to that, but I know that when I'm really sad, it looks like anger, right? So depression is two ways. You go to bed or you fight. So people who fight are often depressed clinically. So just keeping that in mind can be really helpful for how, if somebody's coming at you, realizing that they're in need. And that need is probably sad. Okay. What about you guys? I don't know one of you well enough to put you on the spot like that. So is there anybody from this group?
We were touching on the types of deaths and how that affects the response. So sometimes if people were dying in ways of like maybe an overdose or something, how that would feel different of dying of old age and like an illness or an accident of like, a car accident. And so how the families or their neighbors are experiencing that grief because of the way that the person died, how that impacts it, but also touched on like the popularity part too of like a really outgoing resident that's like well known, how that's different from someone that is like very in their own home and they don't know anybody, and like what do you do for that to, with seniors, we have one senior property too, of like how it might feel if it's not recognized, if a neighbor dies, and how if they are starting to approach that like end of life time, how they might feel if it's not celebrated, even if they weren't like one of the active popular seniors. Yeah.
I had, when I worked at Home Forward, there's a property there called Hollywood East. It's 384 units of housing. It's the biggest, I think it's the biggest property on the east side. And when I got there, we used to call it Suicide Alley. It was horrible. And it'd be every couple months, somebody would jump from the top. And I had done a lot of work at that property, and we had sunk in a lot of time and energy, and things had started to shift slowly. And a man, our colleague, jumped. And it was one of the worst things because the residents depend on us. The maintenance, the property management, the resident services, we're supposed to be okay, And a lot of a lot of our people, I call them homies, a lot of the homies knew him. And so they were really struggling with what happened. And it was an incredible trigger or activator for the people who live in that property. And suicide is so much like that, but other deaths that you experience there are like that too. The ambulance, the police, the attention, all of those things, the news sometimes, create even more activation. And so recognizing that when we're activated, it can be even harder for us to attend to other, because we can't even hardly attend to ourselves. At Hollywood East, there was, I would say, resignation about suicide. And I think that's just sad. We need to be connected to how to connect others so that that isn't what happens. But I want to mention that one of the things we did often when these things would happen is call, and I don't know if TIPS is still around, you all use. So TIPS is a through the police department, you can ask for tips when the police come, and they'll send you a bunch of social workers and therapists. And those people will sit in your community room and just talk to people. And if no one comes, no one comes. We just volunteer to do that. That's a thing that a lot of therapists just sign on to do. So it's a way for people to know that there is something, and it doesn't have to be you. You don't have to take all that in, okay? What happened at your table? What happened at your table? You know I know you best.
I was like, all right, I'll go. We had similar recent death experience that we talked about. This was during COVID, and the fact that we're not able to cater to their needs or able to open a space for their needs as well. The other one we talked about was the management against residents type of blaming as well, because at least for my property, we had a tenant who was really involved with the whole property. And then there was also during that time a manager that was really great according to the tenants. I didn't think she was great, but at the same time. But she was a great manager. She was a great manager, right? There are no managers in here, I'm assuming. But the tenants claimed that she was really great, and this that had happened while we were going through a transition in management, so that the tenants felt like if so-and-so was still the manager, we would have known so has passed away, and we could have done something for her mom, who was also elderly. And it also had happened at a sad time for myself as well, where I was not physically and mentally able to help anyone, and I was out of the office. And the moment we all kind of figured out the only thing we could offer was a Zoom, but then the thoughts of like re-traumatizing came up. And also, how do you say, oops, we're sorry, we were not available, this had happened for you, let's come together in Zoom. And Sarah had brought up, the connectivity, how some people are not able to connect through Zoom and don't have the equipment, don't have the technology or the knowledge for it. And I feel like actually all of us just talked about the same kind of loss experience.
I want to say parallel process is actually what she was talking about. There's a name for that. When you're going through something that your residents are going through at the same time, or your client or whoever it is you're serving, that's called parallel process. We all went through that during COVID. I can barely talk about the beginning of COVID in terms of my work and what happened, because I just moved from my office to my house and started helping people. And I know you all did that because I heard the stories. So, yeah.
I just wanted to say, don't forget snail mail, because when I first started at a different property, I had just ended up talking on the phone to a member. I had never met the person before. And he had mentioned his neighbor had died, and I didn't know anybody or anything from anything. And I thought the right thing to do in this situation is to send a condolence card. And he still brings that up every time I see him. It meant so much to him that I just sent a condolence.
So I wanted to thank you. For the grief retreats that I do, we snail mail everybody a box, a shoebox kind of thing. And inside is a journal about grief that has prompts, some poems, a candle, tea, some crystals, these, which I'm going to show you later, kind of a postcard quote thing that can be helpful, and some poems. So that is a wonderful, wonderful way to just get a card and mail somebody something. Way easier than a box, I'll tell you that right now. And also, it has so much meaning. That's wonderful. Thank you. What about this group right here? Anybody want to speak? Anybody want to speak for the group?
I don't know. So we talked a lot about just like kind of the guilt that is carried with, with staff. Oh, is that better? Oh gosh. Okay. So we talked about the guilt that staff carry when they have come across somebody who has passed, whether it be in like a shelter or in an apartment, low income apartment. But either way, like that guilt and maybe and it being kind of hard to access those services that are needed through different agencies because everybody is overworked, right? And so there's a hard line there or a hard time to get a commitment there and get people to follow through with that commitment. And so then maybe just kind of talking, we talked a little bit about too, like being prepared for that, right? Having an action plan in place before that happens. It's hard when you have an established place and how that, works or whatever, but like starting from scratch, you can have all those things in place. So, educating your staff, educating the residents or the clients or the occupants, however they're addressed, and just providing them some basic, whether it's a printout or something, or whatever, but yeah, no.
I want to say, my guess is some of you have safety plans in your property. So if you have a fire or something like that, everybody goes across the street to some place and they're supposed to stand there. Well, you should have that. Okay. All right. So, but that said, so one of the things is helpful, and this was do you work at Hollywood East? You keep nodding. Oh, you do? Okay. So at Hollywood East, one of the things that one of the resident services coordinators did was put an area in the front of the building that became planted. She put some sort of metal statue there. And whenever there is something that happens, everybody goes there. That's just where people go. They just know that's what it is. I got the idea to do a grief garden for myself on my own property from that idea. And I have just a little patch on my sidewalk and it's got a little bench and some flowers. It doesn't say anything. People leave photographs of people, old black and white photographs. They just leave them there. And after a while, I just bury them in the dirt. So it's like you make it and they will come, I don't know how much I want to pick on you guys because you came late. But I did get to know you a little bit.
Hello, everyone. Well, we talked a little bit about, what we have noticed in our community about grief. And one thing that really struck me was that we talked about how our community as Black people, we don't really have time to grieve. Like there's one thing after the other, and then there's the next thing. So there's like no time to really grieve. So when talking about participants that like live in our properties, it's like, or when we like send a participant to a property, it's kind of like, well, if we don't have time to grieve as people that are taking care of folks, that look like us, and then they don't have time to grieve, it's just like an unfortunate cycle that just keeps perpetuating itself. So, we were just kind of talking about that and seeing how, is there a way that we can, finally find a way to have room to grieve, I think that's just the takeaway we had together.
Thank you for that. I will say, when I'm grieving, I work. And I work a lot. And I will produce so much that when it's not quite as sticky, I'm overworked. I can't even handle the things I started. So there's this signal in my own brain that says, don't grieve, don't grieve, don't grieve, and I'm going to help you by having you go be really busy. And everybody does that differently. So sometimes it's busy, sometimes it's food, exercise, drugs. I like wine. That helps me. So it's like, it's not just one thing, right? Remembering that there are all these things that we put in place to stop ourselves from feeling. And we can do that. Just like we can laugh in here a little bit and talk about something so incredibly hard, right? I don't know any of you very well. So would you like to be the one who speaks for the group a little bit? Would that be okay?
I'm a new resident coordinator, but I lost my mother the beginning of the year, right a week before her birthday, and that was really it's hard. So the pendulum that you were referring to, it happens with myself, and I happen to know a resident that I just realized I know, and Rachel knows her too, but lost her son. And so at times I get angry because of the way I lost my mother, and I have guilt. This guy right here though, when I lost my mother, this was my best friend. He was there, so he helped me through that process. He knew my mother. He's been working in the community for a long time. When I was working in the community at one point, but I don't think I would have got through it without this guy, really. But he was there at 1, 2 o'clock at night. I called him on the phone and we conversed, and he's like, man, Rob, whatever you got to do. But it causes anger, like a Beatrice and Moral, things like that. It causes people to want to fight because they can't express how they feel. Like if you lose a child, you understand that you're going to lose a parent, but when you lose a child, only a son, your oldest son, your only son or something, and you can't relay that to someone else because they don't know, they couldn't process it because you're going through this by yourself, you become on the angry part. You're up here, you're angry. Why? And losing the son in a way that was uncalled for, through a murder, or whatever the case. So we have to try to sympathize, I think, with that person, how they're going through it, what they're going through. We don't have to get mistreated, but we still have to try to rally in some way, shape, or form, and be willing to listen. Because if you can listen to someone, then you can help them. But you got to listen.
The releases of what they have, and trying to express themselves. So yeah, that's it.
Oh, and food.
And food.
I don't know. I'm sure in every culture, but in Black culture, we have food. A lot of times. Yeah, I just was saying a lot of times we come together and we celebrate with food, and that does something. I don't know what makes you feel good, but it does something.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I'll tell you, I'll share. I had my son die about 22 years ago, and I was listening to a book today, and they were talking about it in the book, and I burst into tears. It's old, and it is right there. Absolutely. So noticing that it doesn't go away, it becomes a part of who you are. And then you can talk about things in a really different way. And you can sit with things in a really different way. That's not the choice. I wouldn't have made that choice. I wouldn't have picked this instead of that. But now the meaning I make is this, right? Yes.
So I just want to say, I heard you say it's old. This is just my opinion. When it comes to grief and dying, it's never old. And I think that is some of the problem with our society. We have people walking around hurting because they haven't been able to express their grief. And I've heard a lot, like from folks I work with, people of color in particular. Is unfortunate, but it's historical. And unless you know the history, you would know that. We don't have time to grieve because people are trying to figure out how to pay for the services. And that's the bottom line. Excuse me. And it's unfortunate, but when you aren't taught how to put aside money for retirement or for an unexpected funeral, these are things that we come up against. And so, but going back to my initial thought is, grief is different for everybody. I'm intrigued by grief and death, and I almost went into that field, but people are hurting. They are. And grief, you mentioned Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. My mother passed in 2007, and it's because of some of her work that I got to the other side. So you know what, I love her a lot, because anybody who can work with children that are dying and they know they're dying, you know what, my hat goes off to them. I can do a lot of things, but I don't know about that one. So yeah, it never gets old, and we just have to muster up the strength to get through. So thanks.
Yeah, I'll say I use the term old. You're so right. But I use the term old because 5 of my closest friends have died in the last few years, and my mom died a couple years ago too. And so and I think this is really true. I'm going to speak as a white person for the Black community, and if I'm wrong, you tell me. But the idea of compounded grief, right? It's like if you didn't deal with the first one that was 450 years ago, how do you keep keeping on, right? And then you got to turn around and help your families, help yourself, and then help the people that you serve. It's a lot. It's a lot. Anyone else want to share? You can raise your hand, but I'm coming over. Coming over. Great. Thank you so much.
So we just talked about, I'm new in my position in my organization, so I haven't really had a chance, I hope I never do, experience death within the organization. But we talked about how outside of the organization, death is different for everyone. It burns my soul when people say to me, "Oh, it gets better with time." No, it doesn't. My mother passed in 2003. Each year has gotten worse. So it doesn't get better with time, in my opinion. But yet you find people saying, "Oh, it gets better with time. Oh, they're in a better place. Oh, they're not in pain anymore." You will not find me saying those things to people. Death is different for everyone. And we also talked about that grief is not just death. There's other forms of grief that we deal with in our lives and in our workplaces. And it just shows up differently for everyone.
Thank you so much for saying that. I really appreciate that. One of the things that comes up a lot in grief workshops is divorce. It's a big one. Pet loss is a huge one. And also the idea of climate change, climate grief. So those 3 things come up often when we're doing grief retreats. They come because their person passed away, and all these other things come up, just like I mentioned, and just like you were saying. It's really true. Thank you. What about this group? What about this group? That's for you, Zoom.
Not really. Do you want to talk?
Aw, you could do it.
Well, we talked about like pet loss and stuff like that, and I think we talked a little bit about how people react to you when you've had loss, and that it all looks just different, and we all process it different, and the more loss that we have, the more resilient we become, and it's hard to think about the strengths that you've gained when you have grief and loss.
Yeah, again, I think it's like a trade. So I have all these strengths, but I had that loss. So it's a terrible trade. Terrible. So I agree. I think pet loss, if you think about your residents, I'm going to go over here. You're next. You know, when you think about your residents and their pets, keep in mind that if somebody is alone in their home, that is their person. Okay, my animals, while they drive me insane, they're like this part of me. They're part of me. It's not like it's my daughter or anything. I get that, but kind of close, you know. It's like how I ritualize their deaths is so important to me. You know, so important to how I am able to teach my daughter about grieving and loss, right? So is this the last group, I think? Were you all together? No. Great, here you go.
All right. Okay, so we spoke on grief. My colleague to my right, which I didn't think of, experienced grief from fires, from the loss of property, and so I didn't think about it until I heard her story, and then and also to my left, she's dealing with kids and how she's dealing with the kids. That she had a poster contest for the kids, and the kids drew the things that they lost, you know, but and how it all came about as a form of release, which is I think we was all talking about when you were speaking earlier today. I mean, just now about Inga before you let us speak. I just thought that yes, I do get mad and I get pissed at the system first. I'm from the South. I'm from Louisiana, and so when somebody die, I just blame the system, you know, for my family, Black people family, because you know I noticed the disparities in everything, and how if it wasn't that way, it wouldn't be like this. So yeah, I do get pissed off like that, and so, but I don't know if my colleagues want to add anything.
Listening to this gentleman speak in front of me, he mentioned losing his mother, and my spouse lost his mother early last year, and she was a public figure in Oregon. And so him losing her, it was a personal experience for him, but having others from the outside in the community constantly coming up to him, giving condolences, even with the extent of time that we have since we've lost her, that is also triggering. And so I feel like this has been my first time witnessing something like that, because I have a background working in healthcare and I've done hospice care. So understanding the stages of death, seeing it in a different realm where publicly it's harder. So I don't know. It's definitely complex trying to be supportive of him, and also understanding where community members are coming from when they're approaching him, and also making it known like it's not a good time right now.
Yeah, you kind of run block for your person, right? Thank you for that. I'm going to let this group go. Does anybody want to talk for the group? Great.
It was just the two of us.
Oh,
so we-
great. Okay, cool. Two groups. Go
So we talked about an individual who was spoken to a few days before and passed away in that interim. And so what it's like of that shock to kind of experience someone immediately pass away after you have spoken to them, and just sort of how the community sort of addresses that as well, and sort of looking beyond that and looking at the family as well, and seeing death in the family as well, and just how difficult that is for the self. And then also, we talked about the culture of speaking and having someone else like info and kind of trauma dump and sort of just be there and being able to be from a culture that doesn't stop that and doesn't, prevent that from continuing going, and how that affects our own self and how we address that in our own daily life, and try not to bring that home with us. Yeah, it's heavy topic.
It's a heavy topic. You bet. Thank you for that. I'm going to let you, do you guys want to? Great. Thank you.
Yeah, so we were talking about how we work with people facing insecurity with their housing, evictions, possibly becoming houseless, and how emotional that can be, how they feel like at times like your life might be raveling out of your hands and there's no security in that. And so just like how he just mentioned, providing just listening, just being an ear provides some stability for like our participants, and that might be the only stability they have in their life at that point in time, and providing some sort of next steps possibly could help with that, but mostly just being consistently there for that person. It just means a lot to them.
Thank you for that. Yes.
One of the things I've noticed in our job roles as coordinators is sometimes our residents feel like we are, sometimes we're like their go-to. We're almost like their Jesus. We help them with everything, securing their housing, food, you name it, we do it. And so we see them go through things where they have losses and they lose loved ones. But what I've experienced in my own role over the past couple years is within a year span, I had several losses, 8 losses in a year. I lost my twins, I lost my grandmother, back to back to back losses. And I realized my residents didn't see me almost as a person. They see me as their savior. You're so strong, you're so this, you're so that, to where they couldn't realize that I'm human too, and that I grieve too. And so, I'm somewhat, like you said, after those losses, I just came right back to work. I'm going back to work. I'm going to work through these things. And I found they were very insensitive to the fact that I was grieving. Because the losses I took, they weren't the kind of losses that I could kind of be quiet about. It was on my face. It was on my, it was on me. I was wearing that hurt. And they were very insensitive to it. Oh, you're strong. You do so much. You're so good. And I had to start speaking up and saying, no, I'm hurting. No, I don't want to deal with your trauma today. I had to start speaking up, because if I didn't, I was going to go crazy. So I guess I just wanted to say, as coordinators, we have to also, if we're going to be level with our residents and show them that, I understand what you're going through. When you do that, then I'm now more vocal, like, no, I hurt too. I'm angry too. I'm sad too. Because sometimes we don't want them to see what we're going through. We just want to be the help to them. We want to be the support to them. We allow them to trauma dump on us. But sometimes it's really good to be transparent about who you are and what you're going through, because then if you don't, burnout becomes even more real. Because now you got 2 things going on. You got your residents' issues and you have your own issues, and it will kill you literally if you don't speak up for yourself. So I kind of just wanted to put that out there, that it's important for us in our job roles to be transparent with our residents. Hey, we're people too, and we hurt too. And then that means, so when I'm telling you, you know what, I've been there too, actually she's really been there, because sometimes we say that just to say it. People say that all the time. Oh, I'm gonna pray for you. And then they walk off, you know, dang well they ain't prayed for you, you know, or you know what I mean? We just say what sounds good. No, let's get into a place where we're being so transparent. I'm not just saying what sounds good. I'm walking the same walk you're walking. So we're doing it together. So that's.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I will say that I was a resident services coordinator when I lost my son. And the residents band together and they forced me to take care of myself. They watched me do my thing and were taking none of it. And they were referring me, one woman was referring me to a place, I don't know if you all know of, there's a place called Infant Murder, it's a support group for parents of murdered children, and it's free. And that group also does one for baby loss, which is also free. And my resident had told me about that one, and I thought, I'm not taking a referral from a resident. Like, I thought that. And she kept saying to me, one day she looked me in the eye and she said, how come you gave me referrals, but you won't take my referral? And you know what? That was the most healing thing I ever could have done. First of all, to receive, and then to go get that help that I needed. So, okay, let's see how this works for you all. I have a video that I'd like to have you look at. We're going to try to talk about some more ideas of ways to hold space for this. Have plan B. Well, there we go. Are you able to raise the volume? Okay, let's skip the videos. Let's not worry about it. It was aspirational. Okay, so there are two videos that are on the agenda. The links, one is about sort of finding hope and looking at ritual. This is a hospice worker, and she kind of talks about that. The other one also talks a little bit about ritual, ways of holding space, okay? I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things that I've done. And before I'm going to give you quiet time first. So what I'd like you to do is go to the Self-Compassion Helps Grief, and I'd like you to read it. Just sit quietly and read. When you're done, I'll know because you've put your head up. on the back of your agenda are two poems about grief. These are poems, samples of poems that I often do with my clients, that we offer to people when we do grief workshops. There's something about the way that poets express themselves that can be so healing and soothing. These are poems that are, you know, I'm Jewish, and so for me, something around my religion and my culture often speaks to me in this very powerful way. I think when you're thinking about poems and quotes and things that work for your communities, consider that, right? So these are poems that I find to be soothing and helpful as I sink into my own grief. And I think there are a million ways of expressing, whether it's you watch a movie, you sit, listen to music, right? There's so many ways. So trying not to be limiting. I have some examples here. These are postcards that we give to people. They have different quotes. See if I can do this. I didn't know about the microphone thing. So this is from Blackfoot Chief Crowfoot. He says, "What is life? It is the flash of a firefly in the night. It is the breath of a buffalo in the wintertime. It is the little shadow which runs across the grass and loses itself in the sunset." These are ones from Maya Angelou, Thich Nhat Hanh, Annie Lamont or Anne Lamont. I have them all here for you with some cards for you to kind of learn a little bit more about me, but also so you can take some of these as samples. I did them kind of big so that if people can't see very well, there's lots of choices. So when you're thinking about materials that you offer, whether it's one of those folding things on tables with quotes on it, or you're putting something on the walls, but offering people solace from just looking at other people's words can be so helpful. So again, whatever it is that you feel gives people soothing, not necessarily hope. You're not that powerful, okay? But you can certainly offer them up other ways of looking at this. So we have about 15 minutes, 10, 15 minutes. Does anybody have any questions, comments, additions? Yeah. Yes, of course. I can repeat it. I'll repeat it.
Lisa wonders what folks think about how accessing ancestral rituals for grief could be helpful. Even just how learning about that can be helpful and possibly painful for those who are disconnected from their traditions.
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. Does anybody want to address that before I do? So as somebody who is Jewish, the Jewish mourning ritual is very specific. You sit on a box for 2 weeks, you cover all the mirrors, people come over and they feed you. And for me, that ritual is very uncomfortable because I'm not religious. And so noticing what my spirituality is and how that is what I need to hold space for, and that my culture and what I understand about the spirit can be a part of that, but I don't have to take in everything that every Jewish person took in. That's not my job. And so when you're talking to people about on property, what is it that they want, or how do they look at death? That can help give you insight into how they want to look at how to grieve. right? So part of it is, that's why going back to asking people, somebody comes to you and says, I want to do this thing, it's important to me. They get to lead, and then culture gets to lead as well. So I hope that answered the question. Are there Zoom people, do you have anything else to say or ask? We are here for you. Oh, I'm so glad. I wish we actually could see you all up there. Oh, you can? Oh, okay, don't worry about it then. Yes. Okay.
So I've had the privilege of volunteering at the Dougie Center for the last 7 years or so. And if people aren't aware, it's a really great free resource for kids and families who have lost someone. They have groups for people who have died of a sickness or murder or suicide. They even have young adult groups and groups for people who are like dying. So anyway, it's on 52nd and Foster, basically, Southeast Portland. And it's all free. So, and they also have free like books and resources that you can just go there during business hours and offer those to your residents as well.
Thank you for that. Are there any other questions, comments? Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, I'm your friendly Zoom mediator. But my organization in Central Oregon recently was able to start a housing barrier busting fund. And a small part of that we set aside is for end-of-life compassionate care, both for residents who are experiencing homelessness or who recently transitioned into housing, like receiving hospice care and like ways that we could support their pet needs and family needs, and memorial funeral services. But my question is just to this group and to you, like either now or like find me later in the conference. I'd love to hear suggestions for how we should shape that, or what types of services or offerings that you've seen have been helpful for the folks that you're serving. Thanks.
One thing, this is my second time living in Oregon, and I came back because I noticed how resourceful this place is. And so in Corvallis, they have, it's called a Corvallis Daytime Drop-In Center. And from 9 to 12 every day, the homeless population can go and get coffee, sack lunch, and they have people from Samaritan and job services all meet at this one spot from Monday to Friday. I mean, it might seem something simple, but they depend on it, and it's there every day. So, I mean, if it's something, I mean, people depend on, what is it? What's the word I'm looking for? Repetitious, and so, and I've seen it, and it works, and it's effective.
I think there's a million ways you can go with a program like that. And I think part of it is, again, addressing culture of the property before you make a decision about how you can implement. Oh, wonderful. I still feel that way. But that I think we need to have our communities call the shots. They need to be the ones who tell us what they need. Okay, we're not, even if I came from public housing and I come from poverty, that does not mean that I understand what people need in 2022, right? I don't, and I don't pretend to. I get curious. I ask a lot of questions, you know? Well, I only see me up there now. Anyone else have comments or questions, ideas? Yes.
Hi, Zoom people. So we were talking about culture, and I wanted to reinforce an idea that kind of had been touched on, but as a queer person, there's a lot of grief and death that happens in everyone's life. But one of the really interesting aspects that I experienced when my mom passed away was a lot of the older queer people really knew how to give space and really address and approach, especially queer older men. And I sat with that for a while, trying to realize, like, how are they so good at this? And then I was thinking about the AIDS crisis and how they experience death on a daily, weekly basis. And so one of the ideas that I really want to reinforce is to sort of give that space for others to give you that space, and really be able to sort of allow others to help you stand yourself up. It's just something that has been really impactful in my own community. And whenever I have a friend that experiences death, I'm like, go talk to the gay people. You know, they're fine. They got you. So.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. I think one of the things that's interesting about the LGBTQ community is we don't have a culture necessarily that helps us understand grief over generations, like being Jewish, right? And so during AIDS in San Francisco, we just went to funeral after funeral after funeral after funeral, and we didn't know what we were doing. We just went. And over time, you kind of figured out how to hold space for everybody. And I think that is many articles that I've read during the pandemic have talked about gay men showing up, right? Because they know how, you know? So I appreciate that point. Thank you. Are there any other comments? Yeah. Yes, of course. I do. I think it's a really big topic, because especially when it's a colleague. So when you're a resident services person, they know your job is to be in power, and you know that's your job, to be an authority, like you were saying, to know what to do, when to do it, and how to do it. But your colleagues didn't ask you for that. Okay? They didn't ask you at all to be the person who tells them what to do or serves them. You're not their service provider. But if they're your friend or your colleague and you care about them and you get to sit with them, just like we've talked about back there, that can be enough. But remember that a colleague is not your resident, right? And it's important to treat people the way they expect to be treated, right? So if you treat me like I'm broken, I'm not going to want to come to work when I'm grieving. But if you treat me like I'm grieving, I'll come, and you can help me, sit with me. So that's the first answer that comes to mind. Does anybody have any comments? Oh, yes.
I just wanted to say that when I think about coworkers grieving, one of the things I've noticed, throughout my work career, we have bereavement. People don't take it. Yeah, okay, you can come to work, but what happens is then it comes out sideways. And I think just each of us encouraging one another, take the time that you need and then come back. Like the job is gonna keep on keeping on whether I'm here or not. Take care of yourself. I think sometimes we need to hear that, because we'll get a notion that the job won't keep going on if we're not there. Of course, that's not true, but we have them kind of weird thoughts. But I think just encouraging each other, like, take the time you need so you're not short, you're not shitty. And like, I understand you're hurting. I might not understand your pain. Take a little time off. Just take the time off. And usually pretty good supervisors and directors, like, they get it. Maybe I don't have all the bereavement time, but let's make it happen. Like, I need a few extra days because I can't come to my workplace and be productive.
Thank you for that. I'll let you, Rachel, you be the last one. Do you still want to speak? Sure. Yeah, hold on one sec. I just want to respond. I want to say when I was at home, the beauty of having power is that, and you manage people, is you get to have it be the way you think it should be. So when I was at Home Forward, anybody who experienced a suicide on my team got to go home that day and the next day, paid. Not part of your sick time, not part of your vacation, just go home, okay? And I can do that because I was in charge, frankly. So I want you to keep that in mind, that as you move up in your organizations and you get to make decisions, or you're an influencer and you get to influence somebody to make decisions, make it a part of your own culture that you're gonna give yourselves a break, right? This is the last comment.
So what I was going to say is in line with Victoria was saying, is that we really need to, as a society, begin to embrace that our employees, when they're doing social service or they're practitioners, that they need time and space for breaks too, because it's very important that we recognize that the magnitude of the daily traumas that or triggerings that's happening. So with the story that you were sharing about the suicide, I was the employee that replaced the person that committed the suicide. So everybody at the job was looking at me, and just my presence with my uniform on, I was traumatizing them. So before I even went to the new assignment at the new building, I had to meditate. I had to pray, because I had to get myself prepared for what I was about to walk into, because I knew that I had to be strong and not let my presence not react to them seeing me, because I was re-triggering them. So I just think that it was a struggle and it was hard for me, but I think that part of the reason why I was given that assignment is because I could rise to the challenge. But be that granted, like I'm a human too, and I have emotions, and everybody else seemed to have had that grace, and were, other departments, they let folks go home, but I had to be there. And so that we have to begin to recognize that we are all experiencing things at different rates, but we all are having those experiences. And that I just feel like society needs to recognize that when the employees are the front line staff, and they are really impacted by the blows that they're experiencing.
So I'm gonna, couple things before we end. I have some information here and some postcards for you to take. I guess my response, I want to make two plugs. One is, I know this is a resident services room. Maintenance is not even addressed in this conference. Consider that. Maintenance has the most dangerous job of all of you all. They're literally under a sink with their back to the resident, fixing stuff alone in the unit. And that, what happened to Rachel, I remember that. We need to see them. We need to see them. We are actually the only ones who have that capacity in the organizations we work in sometimes. So notice them. They're your best friends. For those of you who do not come to the Resident Services Peer Leadership Group, I run that monthly. It's the third Monday of the month. If you want more information, you can ask Kevin. You can ask me. I'm happy to do that, but he's the one who gets people calendared and invited to that. And thank you very much. I appreciate your time and your energy and all that you said. So thank you.